What is up, you guys? Welcome to Walk the Line. We're talking UFC Vegas 100. We hit the century mark as far as events taking place over at the UFC Apex Center, excluding Dana White's Contender Series fights or anything of that nature. It doesn't seem like the UFC put too much merit into that based on the depth of this card. Although I will say they did throw us a couple treats, right? In the main event, we got Magny taking on Carlos Prates. That's a phenomenal fight. Carlos Prates is a fighter that is showing to be one of the most dangerous up-and-coming fighters in the game. Not just in the division, in the game. I mean, he's a human highlight reel. It's always going to be a spectacle when you're watching him fight. He's so long and rangy. He's smoking a stove before he makes his way out to the arena. I mean, he's really a character. And I think he has the makings of being a star in the game. Now, poor Magny, he's still ranked 15th in the division. And he's just been getting fed to the wolves. You take a look at some of the fights that the UFC has thrown his way in the last 2 to 3 years, right? He's been locked in there with fighters like Shavkat Rakhmonov, Michael Morales, who was his last fight where he got knocked out in the first round. They threw him in there with Ian Gary. I know Ian Gary is not the most intimidating fighter these days, but still an extremely hard fighter to go out there and defeat. They've thrown him in there with Gilbert Burns. They also threw him in there with Mikey Malott, which at the time, Malott had never lost a fight in the UFC. He had a lot of hype behind him. You know, the UFC just seems to want to use Magny as that stepping stone, as that gatekeeper. And you got to respect Neil. He's always willing to sign the contract. He's willing to go in there. And he's been proving that he's one of the toughest fighters in the game for a very long time. He's 37 years old now. I remember him way back from the Ultimate Fighter days. And you got to tip your hat to old Magny there. Other than that, we got Cody Garbrandt stepping back in there, taking on a fighter that is looking to really solidify his name right now in Miles Johns. I would say Miles Johns is in the prime of his career. I think he's an underrated fighter. And you got Cody Garbrandt at 3-3 in his last 6 fights, okay? So he's had his ups and downs. We know he has problems being finished in the cage. His chin has really diminished over the years, but we also know he's still dangerous offensively. This is a make or break fight for the future of Cody Garbrandt's career. He's still only 33 years old. He's not necessarily over the hump as far as his age goes, but with all the mileage he has in his body, we'll see how he holds up. But again, I do believe that fight is pivotal for the future of his career. Is he going to be an over 500 fighter or an under a 500 fighter within his last 7 fights, which 7 fights is really a good sample size to show what you're doing in the octagon as of recently. Okay, other than that, we definitely have to highlight the UFC debut of Reinier de Ridder, who's taking on Gerald Meerschaert. Excellent matchmaking by the UFC, right? 2 phenomenal grapplers, 2 phenomenal submission threats in the cage. Reinier de Ridder, if you're not familiar with him, he was a double champ over at the ONE FC. I've been following him for a while. I've wanted to see him work his way into the UFC, and I'm really glad that the UFC got their hands on him. He's 34 years old, better late than never. And Gerald Meerschaert, the middleweight submission king, okay? And one of the kings of the submission game throughout the history of the UFC. So I'm really excited to see who gets the better of the grappling there. That's about all we're going to highlight. We could also just mention Cortavious, Romious making his UFC debut. I think he's a prospect that shows to have some real potential. And Mansur Abdul-Malik, he's another fighter that comes off this past season of Dana White's Contender Series that shows to have some serious potential. He's undefeated 6-0, and he's a well-rounded fighter. We'll be talking about him here in a minute. And I won't hold you guys up anymore. I know some of you guys don't like my long intros. All right, guys, I'll just let you know quickly, if you want to work with me for my official plays, which I've been on absolute fire. I've been preaching about it. I have been on one of the hottest streaks I've ever been on over the last 3 to 4 months, okay, throughout my entire MMA betting career. Okay, I'm telling you guys. So I'm on a heater. I've been putting a lot of time into my fight research, and it's been paying dividends. If you want to work with me, shoot me a DM on Instagram or Twitter, or even shoot me an email. Okay, guys? And then the last thing, if anyone's looking to sign up to a new sports book, reach out to me. I'll give you my referral link for BetUS. You will get a 150% match on your first 3 deposits. Okay, guys? Shoot me a message. Go follow me on IG and Twitter while you're over there, and then shoot me a message or email me if you're not a social media type of guy, and I'll give you that link. And if you sign up through my link, I'll give you an additional gift as well. All right, guys, let's jump into the first fight.
The teller.
We head over to the middleweight division where we got Tresean Gore taking on Antonio Trócoli. This is an interesting fight because both fighters have shown to have some real inconsistencies in their fight games at times, but they also have shown to have some flashes, right? The first thing that stands out to me is the fact that Antonio Trócoli has been very absent from the fight game, specifically dating to when he made that Dana White's Contender Series debut, and he went out there and he got a quick submission victory over Kenneth Berg. That fight was overturned due to a failed drug test. Since that fight, he's only been in there twice, okay? And that fight took place back in 2019 on one of the early seasons, okay? So we're talking about in a 5-year span, he's only fought twice. He went out there, got a submission victory after that fight, followed it up with a short notice fight against one of the most dangerous fighters in the game right now in Sharamagomedov, and he showed to have a lot of toughness and durability and showed to have a solid chin. Took a lot of damage from Magomedov in that fight, was continuously walking forward, but he also showed that he had a tough time getting the fight down to the mat, which was going to be a strength potentially for him down there. He never was able to get it there. And you could also say that his striking was limited due to the fact that his arms were zapped from going for those early takedowns. So keep an eye on that as well, because I'm interested to see how the stand-up's going to go. Trócoli brings in a massive 82-inch wingspan. You'll have a 7-inch reach advantage, but I still do side with Tresean Gore as far as the striking goes. Gore started to show his potential and some of the striking abilities that he has back on The Ultimate Fighter, season 29. Right off the rip, put a beating on Ryder Newman. Newman was the wrestler. He was trying to get that fight down to the mat, had no success there. And we saw Gore really picking him apart and showing the power that he has, even though he didn't get the finish. I mean, Newman was all bloodied up. He followed that up with a KO victory over Gilbert Urbina. And then to his UFC career, we talked about those inconsistencies. He's a fighter that started his UFC career off 0-2. The Bryant Battle decision loss doesn't look that bad right now, but the Cody Brundage one was a tough one. That was a fight where he was knocked out in the first round. You know, check this out. Tresean Gore's manager reached out to me after that fight. He caught wind of some of my content and what I was saying about the fight, and he wanted to make sure that I knew that Tresean Gore had some serious health issues going into that fight. He was in the hospital the day before the fight. He had a very bad weight cut, so he was obviously very dehydrated, and that led to him getting his lights shut off so easily. So that's something that you want to keep an eye on. Let's see how Tresean Gore looks on the scales. And you had to be impressed with the way that he followed that fight up, getting that guillotine choke over Josh Fremden. That wasn't any old guillotine choke. That was one of the most unorthodox, and I don't say that in a bad way, but it was an unorthodox. It was a very strange guillotine choke. It was a very weird angle. So he showcased that he's working on his grappling. He's been training with Diego Lima. Diego Lima is a fighter that has a victory over Antonio Trócoli years ago. That's something that I like going for Tresean Gore as well. I think that Gore's grappling will be up to par, and I think he keeps this fight standing anyway, where he will get the better of the striking against Trócoli. I'm going to lean towards a decision victory for Tresean Gore. I just think that the toughness that Trócoli showed in that Magomedov fight could play to be enough to keep him alive to the final minute of this fight, to the final bell. And I'm going to say Tresean Gore does enough to get the victory, inflicting damage and whatnot. But I also believe that Trócoli avoids any type of sub threat that Tresean Gore will bring towards his way. We've seen that development coming from Gore, but Trócoli would have that advantage. And if we saw a sub in this fight, I actually would say, of course, it's coming from Trócoli's way. Trócoli has a much larger sample size of going out there and subbing fighters, 5 submission victories compared to the 2 of Tresean Gore's. But also note, Tresean Gore has never been sub 2. So I don't really see either fighter getting that sub. I think it goes to the final bell. I'm looking at overs for this fight. I'm looking at a decision victory for Tresean Gore. In the women's bantamweight division, Melissa Mullins will welcome the UFC newcomer, Klaudia Syguła, just 25 years old, comes into the UFC with a 6-1 record, which is the exact same record that Melissa Mullins has. Although Melissa Mullins has had a couple opportunities to get her feet wet inside the octagon, that's an advantage for her there. I would also say that Mullins has been in there with steeper competition. But one thing that really stands out to me as we take a look at the UFC newcomer in Klaudia is that she's fought very low-level competition. She's had a couple of custom rules bouts and whatnot. Also take note, she's weighed in pretty heavy. I think in her last fight, she came in at 148 pounds. All right, so she's not really a small fighter, at least as far as stepping on the scale. So keep an eye on her going into the weigh-ins, but very low-level competition. The only fighter that actually even stood out to me was the Brenna Cardoza victory that she had. That was a decision victory. Besides that, very low-level competition. All right. On the other hand, Melissa Mullins is coming off a very disappointing performance where she went out there against Nora Kernol as a pretty hefty favorite, and she completely dropped the ball. She was not able to get that fight down to the mat where she would have had that strength in her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu against the kickboxer Nora. She struggled. It gassed her out. Eventually, Nora hit her with a nasty knee to the midsection, got the finish. She followed up with some head kicks and whatnot. And I think that really set back the potential that Melissa has. I think that we all look at her in a completely different light, and we'll get to the betting line here in a second. That's why I'm kind of surprised to see where that betting line's at. As far as her striking goes, she's kind of scrappy. She looked decent against Irina Alexeva, but Alexeva is another fighter that we don't really know what she's all about. And I want to say that there's a lot of fighters in women's mixed martial arts that have recently came to the UFC. The UFC's been signing these girls early on in their careers, and we don't really know who they are. So it's hard to judge the victories, right? When you even think about the victory she had in Aries FC before she signed with the UFC, in Melissa, she had a victory over Daria Zelenikova. That's another fighter that we don't really know, right? She's coming off a flaky first round loss. She's had some decent performances as well, but in my opinion, we're talking about a lot of lower level women's mixed martial arts, which we know that it just hasn't caught up to the men at this point in time, right? There's lower level fights going on in the UFC as far as women's mixed martial arts goes. But I'll say this much. Melissa Mullins, she's known for her BJJ. So, and Klaudia is a girl that welcomes going down to the mat. She'll try to get on top of you down there, and she'll try to sub you or rain down some ground and pound. In fact, some of her stoppages, even through the TKOs, have been down on the mat. She'll ground and pound you there. She'll hold you down and finish you. I think that we could see this fight go down to the mat in one way or another. And I like the skills that Melissa has there. I think she has an advantage. She's a little bit more of a proven jiu-jitsu player. Melissa also has shown some slight flashes with her striking when you think about the early portion of that Alexeva fight. But then it was just weird, right? Against Nora, she didn't even know how to throw a punch all of a sudden. So, I mean, it's just, you got to be careful here. And Klaudia is the type of fighter, she throws some serious pitter patter at you. So I like the volume that she has. I think she'll be aggressive and she'll come forward, but we're not talking about major pop on her strikes, and we're not talking about her being a highly technical fighter. We'll see what she's about over time. I think this is a fight that could play out very closely, and we'll get to the betting line now. This is why I'm kind of scratching my head here. Melissa Mullins right now, they're opening her up at a minus 260. Okay, she's a minus 260 favorite. I think that that's way too steep. If you're banking on her to go out there and cash in for you at a minus 260 line, I think you're doing it wrong. She very well may showcase to be a fighter that's on another level than Syguła, the young fighter there, but I'm not coughing up minus 260. The value has to be on the dog, and this is a fight you probably shouldn't even be betting. We got the UFC debut of Cortavious Romious, nicknamed Are You Not Entertained, which is such a fitting nickname for him with the last name Romious. Kind of seems like an ancient Roman gladiator name. I don't know how he pulled that last name off, but it's a great one. And his fighting style correlates to that as well. He goes out there and he looks to put on a show for us. He's a well-rounded fighter. He's taking on Gaston Bolaños. Gaston Bolaños is a fun fighter to watch, right? He comes into MMA with that kickboxing, that Muay Thai background. He's known for going out there and landing these spinning attacks. He's landed some of the nastiest spinning back elbows that you'll ever see. I highly recommend you head over to YouTube and you pull up his fight against Rick Gutierrez, which took place at Bellator 189. I believe that was the fight. He hit him with a spinning back elbow. Took just 1 minute and 13 seconds, which made it so crazy was that the broadcast team was actually just talking about how he has one of the nastiest spinning back elbows and that he always likes to throw that attack. Right as they finish the sentence, he hits the spin attack and times it perfectly. And I mean, it was just a devastating shot too. It landed flush. And he's a dangerous striker, man. He really is a dangerous striker. He's consistently came up short in his big MMA fights. Right, you take a look at the Marcus McGee fight that he just had. Marcus McGee knocks him out in the second round. Marcus McGee has a big fight coming up against Jonathan Martinez in the near future. McGee is a terror, okay? But he came up short there. He always came up short in his bigger Bellator fights as well. In Bellator, he had losses against fighters like Solo Hatley Jr., Daniel Carey. I mean, those are fights that you would expect him to go out there and get, right? If he was really getting his overall game together. Also had a loss to Brandon Larocco. I mean, these are not familiar names, even over there in the ancient Bellator scene. So, but I will say this, he's a dangerous striker and he will have potential to land the knockout on Cortavious Romious. Because Romious will look to inflict his own damage on the feet, even though I think that he's actually proven to be a better grappler at this point in time. I have actually been quite impressed with what I've seen from him down on the mat. But he is a fighter that is explosive. He's a supreme athlete, and he'll look to land on you as well. And that cost him in his first fight on Dana White's Contender Series, where he was knocked out against Ramon Tavares. If you guys heard me talking in the last full prediction video that we did, for the UFC Edmonton card, I kind of brought up Ramon Tavares. Ramon Tavares is a fighter that I think is going to really put it together. He has a mean streak to him. He's a very dangerous boxer. And Ramon Tavares knocked Romious out. But after that knockout loss, Romious goes out there, gets another submission victory on the regional scene. And then he got another opportunity on Dana White's Contender Series where he showed to be the better grappler over Michael Imperato, who is a talented grappler in his own right. So that was impressive to me. If Romious fights an intelligent fight here, I think that he does have a clear path to victory going down to the mat. He has to solidify some takedowns, but if he gets Bolaños down on the mat, I really believe that he will have a solid advantage there. Bolaños has been subbed in 2 of his 4 losses. Romious with 5 submission victories out of his 9 wins. There's a path to victory there, but you got to wonder, how long is Romious going to look to entertain us on the feet when the fight kicks off? Because he's going to be in threat of some real danger there. And then, of course, the other X factor is what happens if Bolaños can stuff those takedowns and keep the fight standing. I'm not saying that Romious can't also have success standing, but I think that Bolaños will be very live to inflict some serious damage. And you also take note, Bolaños will also have 3 inches of height over Romious. That won't be anything new for Romious, though. Romious is going to consistently be undersized with anyone that he faces off with in this division. It's just the way that he's built. But I think that length can really help Bolaños if he fights from the outside. All in all, though, I do like Romious. I favor his grappling advantage more so than the Bolaños striking advantage. And Romious is just a game fighter. He's 30 years old. He's figuring this whole thing out. Just 11 pro fights. I think that he's a fighter that will put on a lot of fun performances for us inside the octagon. I do think that he'll take his share of losses. I think that we'll even see him get brutally knocked out here and there. But he'll go out there. He'll use his grappling and his athletic skills to get his fair share of W's as well. So he'll have an up and down type of career, but I think he'll prove to be a fun fighter to watch, which is mostly important for him to hang on to his UFC contract, at least for some time. Romious right now, he's looking to be a -160 favorite. The comeback on Bolaños is at +140. You may think that that's a little bit of a high line next to Romious' name, which I would understand where you're coming from if you said that, but I'm leaning into Romious a little bit here, though, around that line. I just think that he's game. I think he rises to the occasion, and it's not that steep of a line. In the bantamweight division, we got Cody Stamann taking on Damon Blackshear. These fighters from different eras to an extent, right? Cody Stamann made his UFC debut creeping up on 8 years ago, about 7.5 years ago. He's a battle-tested fighter. He's been in there with some legitimate talent. Came up short in a lot of those bigger fights. Damon Blackshear came into the UFC about 2 years ago, and he actually was pretty well established on the regional scene. He's a fighter that's been training under Jackson Wink, one of the few fighters these days you see training under Jackson Wink. Once upon a time, that gym had all the top fighters in the game over there, but not the case these days. But I mean, if you take a look at some of the work that he was doing before finally getting that UFC contract, he was locked in there with guys like Danny Sabatello, Pat Sabatini, Chris the GOAT, Montinho. And he did drop a lot of those fights, but those are fighters that did eventually make it to the big stage. And even Sabatello, a fighter that fought on Dana White's Contender Series, didn't get the contract even with the W, but made some noise over on the Bellator scene. He has had a victory over Matteo Vogel, Josh Smith over at CFFC. And then he finally did get signed to the UFC. And there's been some ups and downs. One thing I will say is if you take a look at the losses, they're against legitimate talent, legitimate fighters like Farid Basharat, who's still undefeated, Mario Batista, love him or hate him. I mean, he goes in there and he gets his W's, right? We saw what he just did to Aldo, even though I thought Aldo won that fight. And then in his last fight, he just got knocked out by Montel Jackson. That was a big official play for me. So I was stoked when that happened. That knockout only took 18 seconds. I was going crazy. And that wasn't necessarily a fade on Blackshear. It was more of me just targeting and tailing Montel Jackson, a fighter that I think spent a little bit under the radar due to his inactivity, but he's a stud talent. And Damon Blackshear is not a bad fighter, though. And I think that he is likely to bounce back here. Some things that I like that he has going for him is the fact that he's going to have a 5.5-inch reach advantage here in his arms. He's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage in his legs. He's the taller fighter. He's about 4.5 inches taller. And Cody Stamann is a fighter that has tended to coast in fights. That's where he comes up short. He always loses those types of fights where he kind of coasts and he sits on the outside, and he has technical striking. Even though he came into MMA with a wrestling background, his boxing's good, his striking's good, but he's just a little bit out of range at times when he's fighting higher level fighters. and he kind of accepts it too. He doesn't really do what he needs to do to close the distance and land those big shots against that upper echelon type of fighter. Yeah, he can go out there and knock out an old Eddie Wineland. Nothing but respect to Eddie Wineland. I was a huge fan of his from way back when he was the WEC champ a long time ago, but he stuck around way too long, and everybody was making a name off of him, knocking him out like Sean O'Malley did. And I'm not putting too much stock into that. I'm not putting an overwhelming amount of stock into the recent victory over Luan Lacerda. I mean, when you see him in there with the Taylor Lapillases, the Douglas Silva de Andrades, the Saad Nurmagomedovs, I mean, Merab is the champ, but even the Jimmy Rivera fight, that was a bad one for him. That was a bad one for him there. That was the typical performance where he was just gun shy and kind of on the outside, and I wasn't crazy about that. He was subbed by the former champ Aljamain Sterling there, but listen, I want to say this. I do have respect for Stamann. I like him as a fighter. I like him as a person. I know he's battled some dark and tough family situations going into fights and whatnot, and I think that he really has a tough fighting spirit. But even though Damon Blackshear is coming into this fight, coming off being brutally knocked out in just seconds, I still feel more comfortable with siding with Damon Blackshear here, just based on the fact that as this fight goes to a decision, which is what I see happening, I do believe that Damon Blackshear will just be a little bit more aggressive, and just that length will help him out there. And I know the numbers point to both these fighters putting out the same type of work rate in the cage, but when I'm watching Damon Blackshear compared to some of Stamann's recent performances, I see a fighter that's just peaking a little bit more so, and he's just a little bit more aggressive. And as far as who has an advantage down on the mat, you could say Stamann may have some wrestling advantages, but Blackshear is very well versed down on the mat, and he has his own wrestling, but I actually like his BJJ better. I mean, he's wild in there. We saw him pull off a twister, right? Not too long ago. How about the twister that he pulled off against, the twister that he pulled off against Jose Johnson? That's nasty. You don't see that move pulled off very often. One of the times I think it was pulled off was when the Korean Zombie did it to Leonard Garcia and their trilogy or whatever, however many times they fought. But that's a hard move to pull off. And believe it or not, the Taylor used to pull the twister off once in a while down on the mats. I'm not just strictly a guillotine type of guy. And maybe we'll have to upload some old footage of the Teller there to the channel. But, let's get to the pick here. It is Damon Blackshear. I'm going to say Damon Blackshear gets a decision victory here. He has a great ability to pull off the submission in there. But, you look at Cody Stamann, doesn't get finished often. His 2 losses that he's ever had out of 29 professional fights have come by way of submission. But I think that Cody can avoid that. I don't see Cody knocking out Damon Blackshear. You could have some question marks about the chin going into this fight after he was just knocked out, but I think Cody won't be aggressive enough. I don't think he'll close the distance enough, and I don't think that he finds that chin there. I think this fight gets into coast mode, and they're going tit for tat. There could be a good pace to it too, but I have Damon Blackshear winning a decision. And we take a look at the betting line. Some of the initial lines we're seeing Damon Blackshear opened up very high. We're seeing him as high as a minus 255 favorite with the comeback on Cody Stamann at plus 215. That line, hey, I'm not necessarily in agreement with it. Maybe I'm just being stubborn. Some of you guys don't like it, but I don't like Damon Blackshear at 2.5 to 1 odds here, coming off that brutal knockout. Okay, and Stamann still is a crafty veteran. I have to say the value's on the underdog in this spot. Maybe Cody Stamann touches that chin, or this is a fight that could be somewhat competitive going to the judges' scorecards, and I just don't feel comfortable chalking up that type of line on Blackshear. In the welterweight division, we got Charles Chuck Buffalo Radtke taking on Matthew Semelsberger. Both these fighters have showcased some ups and downs inside the UFC as of recently. As far as Semelsberger goes, a lot more downs, but Radtke also coming into this fight off a tough loss. But listen, he just got finished by Carlos Prates, which we'll be talking about him here to cap this episode off. And I think a lot of you guys already understand that I have nothing but high praises for what Carlos Prates can do inside the cage. I mean, that dude is nasty, and he was just a little bit too much for Radtke. And you could tell that Radtke was almost intimidated as soon as the fight kicked off. But I mean, look at the performances that he's had before that, though. I mean, the Gilbert Urbina fight that he had prior was amazing. He went out there. I know it was a lower level fighter, but the way he was marching forward, just he was so crisp with his boxing. It was nice and tight. He cracked him with the left hook. He knocked him out. And then in his UFC debut, he did showcase that he can use his higher fight IQ type of tactic to go out there and just sneak out a W, which it's not always the best thing from a fan's perspective, but if you have money on a fighter, you do like to see those things. And he was facing Blood Diamond, the kickboxer fighting out of New Zealand over there at Team City Kickboxing, and he held him against the cage. He got some takedowns, and he did more than enough to take the W there. Made a name for himself on the microphone. He's 34 years old. I mean, the time is now. He definitely needs to bounce back with the victory here. In fact, both fighters really need this W. If Semelsberger loses this, he will be on a 4-fight losing skid. And even though Semelsberger is the younger fighter here at 31, I'm a little bit more alarmed with some of the performances that I've seen from him as of recently, some of the losses that he's taken. Okay, first and foremost, 2 fights ago, he's up on the scorecards. He's looking good. He's looking like that vintage form of Matthew Semelsberger when everything's hitting on all cylinders. He could sit there and duel with you on the feet. Even in some of his losses prior to the Medic fight, they were very competitive. They went to split decisions against high-level fighters. But the Medic fight, he was up on the scorecards, and he got cracked with a nasty shot. He broke down in that fight, got hit with the spinning back fist. Eventually was finished down in the mat. But he ate a lot of damage in that fight. He did. He was hurt for a brief period in time in that fight. It wasn't like he just got one shot sniped. You know what I mean? So I think that he took a beating in that fight, and I think it affected him going into his next fight against Preston Parsons, where Parsons went in there and actually used his wrestling to pretty much dominate that fight. He had a ridiculous amount of control time down in the mat. And maybe you're saying, oh, what is the fact that Parsons used wrestling to get the better of Semelsberger have to do with him getting brutally beaten down and finished via ground and pound? Well, it was the fact that Semelsberger looked a little off to me. He really did. He looked a little off to me. Maybe I'm looking too much into this, but I know he's a fighter that had a football background, played football in college, and I'm wondering where this dude's head's at. Honestly, I would not be surprised if Radtke gets a knockout on him here, standing, and I'm not going to be surprised if I see a more hesitant Semelsberger that's just not really hitting on all cylinders. And Radtke's a tough dude, man. He marches forward. He's very confident in his skill set. Wasn't the most proven before coming into the UFC. We could take a look at a couple of those fights. I mean, had a victory over at CFFC against Raheem Forrest. We saw Raheem fight on Dana White's Contender Series. Not a lot of big W's for him. You take a look at the losses. They're against respectable names like Chris Gonzalez, a proven Bellator vet, Austin Hubbard. You guys know Hubbard. The Justin Montalvo loss, he got knocked out there in the second round. That wasn't the best look for him. But he's looked more durable to me as of recently. The Prates KO, remember, that was a knockout loss that he took where he took some body damage and he was just getting beat up and he wilted. It wasn't like his brain took that much damage. And I don't know, man, I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable backing Radtke in this spot. I don't say it with an overwhelming amount of confidence. If Semelsberger can right the ship here and get things back on track and start to put off some performances like he has in the past. And I briefly mentioned that, but real quick, I mean, first off, the Jake Matthews W was phenomenal. The way he went out there and styled on Jake Matthews. The Jeremiah Wells loss was a split decision loss that a lot of people thought that he possibly won that fight. Even the Alex Morono, the Chaos Williams fight, these are all fights that played out very closely. The Chaos Williams fight didn't go to a split, but trust me, that was a fight that could have went either way. And he kicked off the early part of his career going out there starching dudes. Remember, he had a 16-second knockout over Jason Witt. He's a good striker. He's picked up his striking very well, but we saw he can struggle getting taken down. We saw that in his last fight. I think that Radtke has more avenues to victory here. Either man can get that knockout victory, even though I feel a little bit more confident Radtke gets it, but maybe Radtke also can change levels and get some control time taking rounds as well. So Semelsberger will have a nice 6-inch reach advantage. He's the taller, more larger fighter, but Radtke's he's pretty stacked up. He's built. He's not the most long for the division, but he's jacked up. Looks a lot like Justin Gaethje, and he could hold his own in there. I'm going to side with Radtke. I would like to see him get a W. I would love to see him get on the mic and start spitting. It's a good fight. So we're looking at the line on this right now. I've seen Charles Radtke open up on some books as high as -190. I've seen it as low as -145. The comeback at Semelsberger is going to be right around +130. He's the dog. You guys might not like what I'm going to say here, but I'm going to say it for what it is. I think that this is a fight that should be capped closer. Should be close. I have a slight lean on Radtke, but I'm not dipping up to -180, 190 with him. I think if you can catch Radtke if around one of those lower lines, 145, 150, that's where you want to be. That's where you want to be. You do not want to be coughing up too much because both men are very motivated. If Semelsberger shows up, like I said, if he's looking to be in that vintage form, this is a fight that could be very competitive, and Semelsberger has been in there with higher level talent. But I'm telling you, my instinct tells me Semelsberger's on the decline. Something's going on with him. In the middleweight division, we have Mansur Abdul-Malik taking on Duško Todorović. These fighters, polar opposites, if you will, and I'll explain to you why. Duško Todorović is a fighter. He headlined one of the first seasons of Dana White's Contender Series. He was very hyped up going into that episode. He didn't deliver whatsoever. He got the W, but it was one of the most boring fights that we've ever seen on the show. And in fact, I would say at the time of that fight, of course, Dana wanted to see more action. He was pressing that, and he was saying some of the same things he says now, but I think he was a little bit more lenient back then. Nowadays, if Duško would have went out there and given that type of performance on a recent season, Dana White would have roasted him, would have never allowed him to fight in the UFC. And he got away with it. He was undefeated at the time, I do believe. And I guess Dana was looking at him more like, all right, he's a solid prospect. Maybe he's not going to deliver the most for the fans, but he's a solid prospect. He may be a high-level fighter. And that was not really the case at all. On the other hand, the new breed of Dana White's Contender Series, Abdul-Malik, goes out there just about 2 months ago on this recent season, headlines against Wes Schultz, who's actually a respectable fighter. If you don't know about Schultz, he's a dude that may put it together, and he may find himself winning a fight inside the octagon. So just understand that Schultz's game. And Abdul-Malik went out there, brought the fight, wasn't looking just to sneak off a decision. He ended up getting that KO finish on the show. He gets the contract. Abdul-Malik is a fighter that brings some serious tools to this division. He has an 80-inch wingspan. He's 6'2", has a great frame. He's a career mixed martial artist to an extent, right? This isn't a fighter that's just a freak athlete and he's starting to pick the game up. Abdul-Malik is a fighter that has all types of martial arts skills. And he's trained and he's disciplined in a lot of those classical martial arts, if you will. But understand that he can kickbox, he can box you, he has jiu-jitsu, he could wrestle. He could do the real solid arts, besides all that Wang Chung Fing, all that type of stuff, whatever, what other stuff he's a black belt in, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I'm not super high on all that stuff. Some of that stuff can ground certain fighters and it could bring a little something into the cage with them. But of course, we want to make sure you're polished up with your Muay Thai, your kickboxing, your BJJ and wrestling. And he does all that. He's an absolute fight finisher. That's all he does is finish fights. Finished all 6 of his professional fights. I sense him getting the finish here. Duško has been finished in 3 of his 4 losses. You take a look at some of them as of recently. First off, he's coming off a knee injury as well. If you guys remember, we cashed in big on that. That was one of the free official plays I gave. I actually gave 2 free official plays in that video on CLD to win the fight money line. I believe that was his UFC debut. And I also took CLD to win inside the distance. We kind of got it in a fluky way with the injury. But my point is you have to be wary about how his knee's going to be holding up. Besides that, he was brutally knocked out by Chidi Njokuani. And his loss prior to that was knocked out by Punale Seriano, a dude that just throws wild haymakers. He was able to get a brutal knockout on him. You shouldn't be getting caught by Seriano. You should see those shots telegraphed from a mile away. Somehow he survived against Gregory Rodriguez. I would have never expected that to be the case, but he did. And just also note this: all of his victories inside the UFC are very low level. Jordan Wright, Maki Pitolo, Daquan Townsend. I mean, these are very low level fighters. Even dating back to who he got a contract on against Teddy Ash, another low-level fighter. Did have a knockout victory over Michel Pereira. That's worth noting. I'm not going to just completely gloss over that. That was a long time ago. It was a very different version of Pereira there. Pereira was a little too wild. And I still am not high on Duško Todorović. And I think that he's a fighter that will be very prone to getting knocked out when he's fighting high-level fighters. I think Mansur Abdul-Malik is going to knock him out. He keeps his hands low. And you want to talk about doppelgangers. We were just talking about Raki looking like Gaethje. I mean, who does Duško think he is? He thinks that he's the guillotine king, and I'm not talking about me. He thinks he's Dustin Poirier there, looking just like him. Let's get over to the betting line, where we will see that Mansur Abdul-Malik is ranging from a -330 to a -390. Okay, on average, right around -350, 360, depending on your book. That line doesn't look that steep to me. And this is a fight that you want to look for the unders. You want to look at the under 1.5s on this fight. You want to target Mansur Abdul-Malik to win via knockout. I think that's the route you want to be going here. I don't think that Duško Todorović makes it to the final bell. He's been quite the fight finisher himself. If you want to play devil's advocate for anyone that's liking Duško, I could see maybe you guys are trying to say, Duško brings the fight too. Maybe things get wild in there. Fight goes to the later rounds. But Mansur Abdul, he showed to have good cardio in that fight with Schultz too. This is not a fighter that's going to gas on you. I'm letting you guys know that right now. He's not going to gas on you. He's not a front runner. Doesn't have a crazy amount of rounds under his belt. Going into that Schultz fight, all of his victories were in the first round. But that Wes Schultz fight made it to the tail end of the second round. He was just getting into rhythm. I'm telling you, he's the real deal, guys. I got my Abdul-Malik getting the KO. Now, we mentioned Cody Stamann being a fighter that's from another era. These two fighters certainly are. Nicolas Dalby taking on Zaleski dos Santos. Both these fighters have been around the block. I mean, you take a look at the age, but it's even more than that. These dudes are battle tested. They've been fighting in the UFC for some time now. Dalby's 39 years old, still in phenomenal shape. I mean, he's a great athlete, takes very good care of himself. Zaleski dos Santos is always game. If he loses to somebody in the octagon, it's a very high-level fighter, and it's a competitive fight, okay? And he's also gone out there, and he's taken those big victories against high-level fighters and those close matches as well. So don't think that Zaleski dos Santos is someone that can't get over the hump. I mean, he's a game fighter, right? I know he was a little bit out of touch in that Randy Brown fight. He was just a little bit out of range at time. Would have liked to see more output by him, but that was a fight that was very competitive. Don't let the fact that it was a unanimous decision fool you. That was a competitive fight, and I thought he actually started off very well. I would have liked to see him step on the gas a little bit more throughout the fight, but Randy Brown's a good fighter, man. He's rangy, he's younger, and he had that going for himself. Before that, he went to a draw with Rinat Fakhretdinov, who was a common opponent of Dalby's. Dalby just comes off that loss to him. That was a split decision. Rinat Fakhretdinov, man, that dude, let's not even talk about his last fight. Victory over Abubakar Nurmagomedov, the Benoit Saint Denis. That was a solid victory. That was an absolute war. What a great performance by him there. Zaleski dos Santos was absolutely brutalizing BSD in that fight, damaged him up bad. That's where BSD showcased his heart and how much of a warrior he was, just continuously coming forward. But make no mistake, dos Santos just dismantled them in that fight. I mean, that fight should have been stopped. That was a whole controversy with the ref and all that. But losses to the Leech, lost to Muslim Salikov, another close fight. He's gone out there and even showcased. People look at him as a kickboxer, but he's gone out there. If you have low-level grappling, he will dismantle you. We saw him do that to Curtis Millender, finished him up in the first round, pulled off the rear naked choke there. If you guys remember that one back in the day, had the knockout. One of the few men to ever beat Sean Strickland had that spinning hook kick. If you guys remember that, hit him with that wild kick, knocked Sean Strickland out. Way before Alex Pereira was catching Sean Strickland slipping, there was another Brazilian doing that type of work in there. So, I mean, victories over Omar Yakhmedov, Lyman Good, Max Griffin, dating all the way back to his UFC debut, which was against, who do you think? Nicolas Dalby. And that fight did go to a split decision. It was a very close fight, and you know he wants to get this one back. I think the fact that he lost that first fight gives him a little bit of an advantage. I think he'll be a little bit more hungrier to get a W here. When a fighter has that nasty taste in his mouth and a split decision loss against a fighter, I think that gives him an edge there. And not to say that Dalby won't be extremely motivated. He will be putting in all the work. I just think that you got to think that's a slight advantage for Zaleski dos Santos. Dalby's a great fighter. We'll make this quick because I want to get to the betting line for this fight. But obviously, Dalby has been holding up in the later half of his career, way up there in age. If he would have won that Rinat Fakhretdinov fight, he would have been on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fight winning streak, right? And he had a big time upset victory over Gabriel Bonfim. Now, there's some respectable names out here. Muslim Salikov, we were just talking about, Warley Alves. He's been around the block, man. He's been around the block, and he's left the UFC. He made his way back to the UFC. If you guys remember, he kicked off his UFC career. Well, we talked about the fight. He went to a draw with Zaleski dos Santos. That was his UFC debut. But then he went to a draw with Darren Till in a very competitive fight. It was a very competitive fight there, too. So he's been around the block. But I'm going to take Zaleski dos Santos here. The things that I like that Zaleski has going for himself are the fact we already talked about. He'll be a little bit more hungry. He's a little bit younger. Take that for what you will, though. But I'll take those 2 years, even though Dalby takes very good care of himself. Note, Zaleski takes very good care of himself as well. All right, he's a young 37. So I like that for Zaleski. You look at the numbers. He's been a fighter that has pushed the pace a little bit more as far as landing in the octagon, landing at 4.3 clip compared to Dalby's 4.06, while absorbing a little less too at 3.42 compared to Dalby's 3.52. Those are close numbers, but those are slight leans I'll take towards Zaleski's way. And I just have always had a lot of respect for Zaleski. I've tailed him. He's cashed for me multiple times. I think he's just an extremely game fighter, and I'm not holding him to the fire because he came up a little bit short against Randy Brown. I think he's been in there with some very competitive fighters, and when he's in there, he believes in his true heart that he's the alpha and that he's supposed to be dictating the pace of the fight. I like that. So let's take a look at the line here. This fight is essentially pick 'em odds. Depending on your book, You might see a slight lean one way or the other. Let's just say this is a pick'em fight, and I will pick Zaleski dos Santos to get revenge here. This is it's going to be a great fight. Pick your poison. I think you could say there's value in either fighter. I mean, we can't argue with pick'em odds. I say Zaleski gets the job done via decision. Nicolas Dalby is a fighter that has never been finished. I ain't going to bank on him getting finished right now. I think this fight could be a war, but even then, I say it goes to the judges' scorecards. And I'll say a split decision victory this time for Zaleski. We have the UFC debut of the Dutch Knight, Reinier de Ridder, the double champ from ONE FC, comes over to the UFC. I'm very excited to see what he could do in this division. And the UFC did a magnificent job with the matchmaking here for a debut fight. He's taken on Gerald GM3 Meerschaert. Whether you understand this or not, GM3 is one of the greatest submission artists in the history of MMA. He's ranked number 3 in the UFC record books for subs. He's tied with Damian Maia, okay? I believe he has 11 submission victories inside the octagon. He's a very high-level grappler, but a lot of you guys are probably familiar with what GM3 is about already, not necessarily known for his striking. Let's talk about de Ridder here. If you're not familiar with what he is about, he's 17-2 as a pro, a double champion in ONE FC, as we said. Now, understand that he technically was a middleweight and a light heavyweight champion, right? Over at ONE FC, they may have different names for the weight classes based on how they do the whole weight cutting thing. He was fighting at in the light heavyweight division and in the middleweight division. He was just on an absolute tear for a while, going out there, finishing dudes left and right. And when you're talking about a high-level grappler and de Ridder, he's the type of fighter, you have to understand, he's a fighter that is always looking for the finish. That's what's so exciting about him. When he's down on the mat, he's consistently fishing and looking to finish you down there. So don't think that he's some high-level grappler, like in the form of maybe, with no disrespect intended, but like a Khabib style, some of those Dagestani guys that will maul you, rip you down, and control you down on the mat. You're going to see some really tricky stuff from him down there. And understand that even though you may see some losses as of recently, not to completely overlook it, because he is 34 years old, and you could argue that he's not a prime version of himself. It would have been better if we would have caught him when he was maybe 30, 31. But understand that he's been fighting some high-level competition. He recently lost twice to the same man. Got finished in both of those fights against the undefeated Russian Anatoly Malikin. He's a tough dude. And I believe Anatoly is a fighter that has bounced from the heavyweight division down to the light heavyweight division. So he was a big dude. He's a solid fighter. In those fights, showcasing a little bit, if you can stuff takedowns, if you can keep the fight standing and make it more of a fight, that's where you have a chance of getting the better of de Ridder. We definitely got to highlight some of his earlier bouts. Had a knockout victory over Gilberto Galvao. The victories over Ong Sang. If you guys are familiar with him, Ong is a fighter that went on his own tear over in the ONE FC. He was the former champ, trains over at Team Killcliff FC, surrounds himself with some good people. And while getting these victories over in MMA, he's dabbled in the BJJ world as well. Went to a draw with Andre Galvao recently. And I want to let you guys know, I believe that he's the real deal. Okay, you could take a look at a lot of these victories and say, oh, they're not against the same level of competition. You may have a point there. But I'm telling you, de Ridder is extremely high level down on the mat. And what I like from him in this matchup here is he's a fighter that's never been subbed. He's very polished defensively with his BJJ, okay? He's very dangerous offensively, but he's still never been subbed as a pro. GM3 is a fighter that's dangerous offensively, but he's actually shown that he's prone to not only being subbed, he's been subbed 3 times throughout a pro, he's been subbed in the UFC before. He's a fighter that's prone to getting finished in a variety of ways. He can get knocked out as well, right? So he's a fighter that he gets hurt at times. What he's good at doing is getting hurt at times and pushing through it and breaking fighters, but breaking fighters that are a little bit more low level with their grappling or their cardio, which is what he did against Edmund Shabazi in his last fight, what he did against Brian Barberena. Brian Barberena, kind of an overachiever with his toughness. And this is such a great fight, guys. I'm really excited for it. I think that de Ridder is going to get the better of the grappling exchanges. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but I really expect this fight to touch the mat. I think that these men will entertain that type of scenario. Maybe GM3 is looking to showcase his striking and he tries to avoid it. But even then, I think that we will see some exchanges down in the mat. And I think de Ridder will be the better fighter down there. And I think that he can get a finish in this fight. I do. And it could be maybe even some type of TKO. You never know. I mean, he's pretty nasty with his ground and pound, man. He'll get you down there and he'll land some nasty ground and pound I'm going to say De Ridder gets the finish. If that TKO does come, again, I do believe it would be down in the mat. I'd be really surprised if he landed something standing. I'm not overly impressed with the striking that De Ridder has showcased throughout his career, and I don't expect him to all of a sudden show flashes there at 34 years old. Remember, he is a fighter that came into MMA with a very strong BJJ and judo background, which is interesting too, based on the fact that he's a Dutch fighter, and they're really known for their striking, right? With that Dutch kickboxing, he didn't have that type of base. He has a strong grappling base, and I hope he pulls off some type of finish on Gerald here. That's what I'm hoping to see. Now let's take a look at this line. Reinier De Ridder is right around a -270 to a -290. All right, he's creeping up on that 3-to-1 type of ratio there, 3-to-1 favorite. This is a test for him, man. This is a test because Gerald has the ability to make this a scrap, and sometimes De Ridder has fallen short in those types of situations, and he is 34 years old. Gerald Meerschaert's 36, though. Is that a little bit of a steep line for what could be a little bit of a tough situation for him, making that UFC debut against a fighter that is so grounded and comfortable inside the octagon and can make it play out to be a war? Could be the case. I like De Ridder, though. I like him. I like him to get the finish. I like his money line, I guess. If you want to put me on the spot, I say I like the money line. I say he gets the job done. I like him, and I really want to see him have a lot of success in this division, and I'm excited to see what kind of matchups we could do with him next. I've been waiting to see him fight in the UFC for a long time. In the women's strawweight division, we have the former title challenger, Karolina Kowalkiewicz. She's taking on the youngster, Denise Gomes. Gomes is 24 years old. I know we don't have an age listed here. She's a very young fighter that has a lot of room for growth, and she's already shown some major flashes in the UFC. It all started with a great performance by her when she was an underdog on that Dana White's Contender Series fight against Rayan Amanda. Took a close fight there. She did fall short in her UFC debut against Loma Likbumi, who we know is a fighter that can be tricky at times, but you gotta love the way she put things together after that, right? She goes out there as a big dog against Bruna Brazil, gets the knockout in the second round. She had her hurt in the first round. She showcased that her boxing skills are legit. Followed that up with a first round finish over the very talented, but unfortunately a little too green for where she's at in the UFC right now, in my opinion, Yasmin Jauregui. This is a fighter that maybe should have been groomed a little bit slower into the UFC. Just talking about Yasmin, because she's so talented, but again, had another tough loss where she just makes these mental errors in there at times. But two great performances by Gomes. She fell short against Angela Hill, but you got to like the way she bounced back against a good fighter in Eduarda Mora, a young fighter that's worked her way from DWCS. So, I mean, I think that Gomes has showcased to have some of the better pop, the better power that we've seen in the women's strawweight division in some time. I think that she's a fighter that can get a knockout in this division. You don't see it that often, but she is a fighter that can knock you out. And Karolina Kowalkiewicz is a fighter that is there to be hit. Now, she's very tough. She's very tough. She's only been knocked out once in her entire pro career. You look at 8 losses. She's only been knocked out once, but we've seen her eat a lot of damage. We've seen her bloodied up before. And as she gets older, you got to be a little careful there. I think that Gomes is potentially live to get a knockout. I'm not sure if I'm going to give you that knockout for my official pick here, but I do believe that there's potential for something like that to take place. Karolina pushes a great pace in the cage. I mean, look at that number, 5.71 strikes per minute. That does trump the 4.48 of Gomes, but she also absorbs 5.55 compared to 3.12. Like we said, she absorbs a lot of strikes, and I see Gomes getting the better of these striking exchanges. I think and let me just say this too, the 5.71, not that she doesn't still push good volume, but she's up there in age. Those numbers are skewed because you have to understand, when she was younger, she was really pushing the pace in the cage. Of course, she can still do that, but they're skewed. Just know that. I don't think she's still a 5.71 type of striker in there. And even if that's the case, Gomes can keep up with her. She can keep that pace up with her, but the difference will be the power and the damage that's landed in this fight. I think that Denise Gomes gets the job done. Now, Karolina has since put a little winning streak together before falling short against Yasmin Lucindo. You can give her some props for not getting finished. Lucindo's a talented fighter. She's a dangerous striker. Before that, she was on a 4-fight winning streak. Look at the level of competition, though. Yeah, Felice Herrig was coming out or potentially or debating whether she was going to retire or not. No, she had like an oldie fans or whatnot. Silvana Gomez Juarez, not a good fighter. Vanessa Demopoulos, not that high on her, even though she gets her victories here and there. Diana Belbita, no, not high on her either. And then a lot of L's going on, although you can argue also a lot of high-level losses. So take those for what you will. A lot of her losses have been against high-level fighters. I think that Gomes she's kind of a high-level fighter. She's getting there. She will be a very high-level fighter by the time she's 28, 29 years old. I do believe that. I think she brings a little bit of an it factor in there with her. She's powerful. She's strong. She'll be at a 2-inch reach disadvantage. Not worried about that. I think she has the footwork to get on the inside and be quicker and land those boxing strikes. Give me Denise Gomes to get the job done. I can't pick her to get the knockout in this division just because Karolina has proven to be so tough, and I could see her kind of hanging in there and getting bloodied up, but making it to that final bell. It's just hard to pick a knockout victory, but I think I made it kind of clear. If we're going to see a knockout in the strawweight division, this fight has the potential to be it. All right, let's take a look at the betting line. Denise Gomes is a minus 450 favorite. The comeback on Karolina is at plus 350. Gomes is a big favorite. It's a little risky based on the craftiness of Karolina, just the fact that she's losing to these high-level fighters. So, I mean, is she really going out there just losing consistently against anybody? I don't know that to be the case. It may just be the fact that she's getting matched up with some tough chicks, and if she gets a girl towards the middle of the pack, she can handle herself still at 35. I don't know. She's up there in age. I wouldn't be pushing any of you guys to be targeting KK here. You stay away from that. I think you have to be more on the Gomes side, regardless of how high that line is. Or maybe you're crazy out there and you're looking for a KO prop or something like that if you get a nice line on that. But give me Gomes to get the job done via decision. In the bantamweight division, we have Ricky Turcios taking on Bernardo Sopai. Remember now, Bernardo fell short in brutal fashion in his UFC debut, where he took on the very dangerous Vinicius de Oliveira, who just went out there and defeated Ricky Simón. We caught him at dog odds, if you guys remember that. Vinicius de Oliveira is a dangerous man, and he massively towered over Sopai in that fight. There was a huge size advantage for him. Take that for what you will, because Turcios is going to be the bigger fighter here as well. But Sopai is the real deal. I really believe that. I think he's going to figure it out. He's a dangerous fighter. We've been hearing a lot about him as far as being a fighter that's been training MMA from a very young age. He turned pro very young. He's one of those new generation type of fighters, just learning mixed martial arts as a whole from a very young age. He's of Albanian descent. He's been training out of Sweden, and he's a tough dude. Now, I will say this. To me, he did look to have octagon jitters in that UFC debut. And if you have octagon jitters in your UFC debut, and then now you're going into your second fight after brutally being knocked out with a flying knee, I think that those octagon jitters can occur once again. All right. I don't think that just for the fact that you were in there once before, now you're good, because it went horrible for you the first time. So that's something you got to keep an eye on. Ricky Turcios is a very game fighter, but he's a little bit of an underachiever, in my opinion. I was not impressed with the performance against Raul Rosas Jr. I thought that was a fight that he could have managed much better. The way that he tactically took on that fight, he can be a little bit of a head case. I don't really rely on him so much to make the best fight IQ decisions. And I think that he could fall into some mistakes here. And although he has grappling abilities as well, he has jiu-jitsu. He's a well-rounded dude. He could out-volume you. He could outstrike you. He's tricky there. If you're a lower-level fighter, he can get away with doing that to you. And we saw that on display in the Ultimate Fighter finale, where he was able to get that split decision victory over Brady Haston. He used those type of tactics against the tough wrestler Dan Argueta on the show. But take a look at even all his victories as of recently. He's not finishing anybody. He's more of a decision type of fighter when he's fighting higher level fighters. And that's a problem to me because I think that tit for tat, he's going to have a tough time trying to get a decision victory over Sopai. I think that the UFC put this fight together for a reason. They understand that Bernardo Sopai is just 24 years old and has a potentially bright future. They don't want to completely discourage him, having him go in there taking another L. I think that this is kind of a setup fight, if you ask me, for the youngster. This fight on the main card, it's looking like it's on the main card here. So they like him. And I think that he's the more complete fighter. I think that he could use wrestling to kind of dominate down there. But I actually think that he's potentially live to get a knockout or some type of finish. It could be maybe even a sub, a knockout. It's hard to say because Bernardo Sopai is a very well-rounded fighter that can get a finish in a variety of ways. It's a nice little step up for him here. But I think that with the fact that he's 24 years old also, and having that learning experience, I think that probably lit a fire under him like no other. and he's going to be super sharp for this fight. I'm going to say this time the lights aren't too bright for him. All right, I'm going to say he's got his shades on, and he does enough to not only get a W, I say he gets a finish here. I say he finishes Ricky Turcios. Turcios is still just 31 years old, but I don't know. I feel like he's a dude that's starting to be on the decline, and maybe he just was never really worthy of being on the UFC roster. I don't know. Maybe I'm being harsh on him, but was not impressed with that Raul Rosas Jr. fight, just the way that it played out for him there. He made some pretty bad mistakes there in the second round. And I don't have a line on this fight right now. I'm recording this nice and early. I don't have a betting line for this fight. In fact, this is the only fight, for some reason, they didn't release the betting line out. I'm going to say that Sapai is going to be the favorite. I'm going to say that this is interesting. I like doing these. I'm going to say that he's going to open up or open settle, whatever. It's going to be in the range of him being a minus 250 favorite. Maybe I'm way off on that, but maybe he opens up as a 2-1 favorite. Maybe it cruises to like around 250 to 300. I don't know. Maybe I'm off on that, but I'm hearing a lot of good things about him. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing he's the real deal, and then he has a bright future ahead of him. So it's looking to be one of two women's strawweight bouts on the main card. We got Luana Pinheiro taking on the Savage, Jillian Robertson. Jillian Robertson, a fighter that's really starting to put it together. We kind of thought that was going to be the case a long time ago because she had an early start to her UFC career and she showed flashes. She's still under 30 years old. She surrounds herself with a lot of good people. She's bounced around to some of the bigger gyms. I believe she has Dean Thomas training her extensively. And really, it starts with her grappling, though. Her grappling's very high level. It's a very above average for the division. And if you're lacking there, she could take you down and dominate you, as we just saw her recently do against, she had some takedowns against Michelle Waterson, but what she did to Polyana Viana, getting the finish down there, that was impressive. She did take an L before that to Tabitha Ricci, but Ricci is the real deal. She's a good fighter. Prior to that, she had the armbar submission over Pierre Rodriguez, and she also had a rear naked choke over Maria Agapova, shutting her down there. And Agapova, if you didn't know, she seemed to be a little bit of a head case. I think there was some bad blood that was going on in that fight back from the American Top Team days there. Now, Pinheiro, on the other hand, she had an amazing Dana White's Contender Series fight. If you guys remember, she had the first round knockout over Stephanie Frosto. But I have not been impressed with what I've seen from her overall since that knockout. I really don't believe that she's lived up to the hype. And she has a strong martial arts base and background. I mean, she could strike. She has some judo skills, I believe, as well. But the Randa Marcos fight, that was one I did not like at all. She got the W via DQ on Randa Marcos due to that illegal upkick. Wasn't a legal upkick, but I'm sorry, guys. I really felt that she oversold it, and she didn't like the way that fight was going. The crafty, tough Marcos was ready to scrap, and I thought that she took the chicken's way out. So you always got to keep that in mind because I believe that she may have some mental issues. I don't think that she's the toughest fighter. Okay, she has some talent, but I don't believe she's the toughest fighter. Had a victory over Sam Hughes and Michelle Waterson. Remember, Waterson was very aged at that time. Take those for what you will. She was finished by Amanda Ribas and then just submitted by Angela Hill. I think that Jillian Robertson has the potential to go out here and finish her. If Jillian Robertson goes out here and really pushes the pace, I think we could see another finish on Pinheiro. I really wonder and question where she's at mentally, and Robertson has the ability to finish fights. You take a look at Robertson's 14 victories as a pro, 9 submission victories, 2 KOs, TKO KOs. She can get you down the mat, maybe rain down some ground and pound on you. She could really control you. She has great hips down there. And I think that there is a potential for another finish and a women's strawweight bout here. I'm interested to see how these two fights play out in the main card. I think we could see some finishes here. If you want to play devil's advocate, if Luana shows up with her head on her shoulders, she is a fighter that could be tricky there on the feet. If she can keep it standing, maybe use her judo skills and her hips to keep the fight standing and try to outpoint Jillian. We've seen Jillian lose fights like that before, but all in all, I think that this is Jillian Robertson's fight. That this is her fight to however you want to say that. It's her fight to lose or to win. I think you guys know what I'm saying. This is a fight that she should win. This is a fight that I think that not only that she could win, but she can get a finish here. And I like her to get the job done here. Jillian Robertson, she is about a minus 250 favorite, okay, with the comeback on Luana at plus 200 or so. She's a 2-1 dog. There's a reason why that line's like that. People have a lot of confidence in what Jillian's doing, and it's warranted. Currently ranked 14th in the division. Luana is ranked 13th in the division. I'm not really in agreement with that ranking. Time will tell. We'll see how this fight plays out, but give me Robertson to use her grappling skills to either really have a dominant round here or there, or even potentially to get that finish. But if it goes to the judges' scorecards, I still say that she has a dominant round at one point in time in this fight. And we'll see if Pinedo can dig deep and try to survive through it. I see some real control time for Robertson, and we'll see how much damage she can inflict. Here we go to the bantamweight division. Our boy, Cody Garbrandt, stepping back in there, taking on Miles Johns. Cody Garbrandt. This is, I don't know, is this a must-win? I mean, if it's not a must-win, it's certainly close to it. We talked about the fact that this fight is going to put him over or under the hump of being a 500 fighter in his last 7 fights. Okay, so you understand that going into this fight right now, you take a look at what he's been doing. Had a loss to Davison Figueiredo, was on a 2-fight winning streak before that, lost to Kai Kara France. He was a 50-50 fighter. The loss to Rob, the win against Rafael Sansao, the beautiful knockout he had there, that puts him at the 500 mark in his last 6 fights. We'll overlook the 3-fight losing skid that he was on before that, because if you really want to go down that aisle, we could also talk about the amazing fights that he had before that. If you want to just continuously go back, I mean, the performance he had against Dominic Cruz, one of the most iconic performances ever in the bantamweight division. For all you new fight fans, go run the tape back on that. He was dancing all over Cruz. No one did Cruz like that at the time, too. Cruz was just phenomenal back then. He had some big knockouts early on in his career, too. He would go to war. TJ Dillashaw did him dirty, man. He was on the EPO. He was on all these performance-enhancing drugs, and he brutalized Cody's chin. And we saw that followed up by Pedro Munoz. We saw that in the Kai Kara France fight. And we've seen him be a much more hesitant fighter throughout the years, rightfully so, because he knows he could be put out. He has a lot of damage on that chin, and he's put in a lot of work in the gym. He's gone to war over at Team Alpha Male. There were stories about him and TJ Dillashaw going to war even back before they fought. So I really think that he has a weathered chin. He trained boxing from a young age. He's a tough dude. And I don't know. I do believe that he's a little bit of a shell of himself. Even the Figueiredo fight, that was a fight where he didn't want to exchange. He was worried about the power of Figueiredo's. And then the way he was just kind of mopped up in the second round and subbed, I think you got to have some question marks about his grappling as well. Even though Figueiredo's high level, but Miles Johns is a dangerous young up-and-coming fighter that can do a little bit of it all. He's a strong wrestler. His striking has really came around, if you ask me. It's not the most polished, but there's some pop. There's some power on it. We've seen him land some big KOs, and if he touches Cody's chin, Cody is going out. I'm letting you guys know that right now. He hasn't had a knockout in a bit, but the knockout that he had over Anderson Dos Santos, the knockout over Kevin Natividad, right, early on in his UFC career, he was getting those knockouts, and although he hasn't gotten them as of recently, I still think he's looked really good in the cage. All right, the victory that he just had over Douglas Silva de Andrade was a good one, right? He dug deep in that fight. He was willing to trade and he was mixing it up. He's a fresh fighter. The Dan Argueta fight, how about that fight, man? That was overturned to a no contest, but make no mistake, he dominated that fight, pushed the pace in Argueta, and was out wrestling and out grappling him, taking him down in the third round. I mean, that was a performance by him. Now, if you want to put him under the microscope, you could say that he hasn't fought the most high-level fighters, but his time's going to come. We're going to see what he's about as he starts to fight these higher-level fighters. He gets a victory over Cody Garbrandt, and it's going to be a nice step up after that as well. If you were to tell me this fight was guaranteed not to touch the mat and we were guaranteed to not see a KO, yes, in that case, I may even lean Cody Garbrandt, but that's not the case. This is a straight-up MMA UFC fight. Anybody can get knocked out. Your chin needs to hold up in a matchup like this when you have a young stud 30-year-old fighter that's going to be pressing you, lunging into your chin with some heavy hooks. Your chin needs to be able to hold up. And also when you have a fighter that has a wrestling background like Miles Johns, who's shown he could take down high-level wrestlers at that, you have to feel that there's a likely possibility he can get in on Cody's hips and get some takedowns as well. Now, as he looks to use some of those types of tactics, do understand that Cody is still dangerous. He's a dangerous striker, and he's live to crack anybody. And we've seen Miles Johns knocked out as well. We've seen his chin tested. So that's another X factor here. But all in all, if you're picking this fight intelligently, if you're betting on this fight intelligently, in my opinion, you're going to be on the Miles Johns side. It's not about name recognition and stardom. It's about having the reliable horse take you to your final destination, and Miles Johns is the horse that's going to be a lot more reliable here. Cody Garbrandt may be a horse that can take it to some really high speeds, but he's got some shaky legs. And before you hop up on his back, you're looking at his legs and you see that those legs, they're not looking right. Those legs may break on you. And if his legs break, you're going to be stuck in the middle of the woods with some savages looking to catch you out there, if you guys know what I'm saying. So give me Miles Johns to win this fight. I say he gets the knockout. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, I say he gets the knockout in this fight. And if Cody really doesn't want to go there and really tries to avoid that knockout extensively, he's going to be on that back foot running away. I think that as he's on the back foot, he gets pressed against the cage and he gets taken down and can run into trouble down in the mat anyway. And even if he survives, he's going to lose the decision here. So I am on the up-and-coming Miles Johns, who's looking to really make a name off of Cody here. Miles Johns is a -135 favorite. The comeback on Cody is at +115. I think that the value is on Miles Johns. I have Miles capped more as a maybe. I mean, it could be up there. I think that he wins the fight. It could be maybe. I think that line should be with him being maybe a -175, 180. Okay, so Cody, man, for all you Cody fans out there, just know what you're getting with him. Here we go. We're at the main event. We got Neil Magny taking on the Nightmare, Carlos Prates. This fighter absolutely has bursted on the scene. It all started with that phenomenal performance where he went out there and pretty much dismantled my boy Mitch Ramirez. Shout out to my boy Mitch Ramirez, who's really a great fighter. He's been having some real tough matchmaking done by the UFC. And the UFC did my boy Mitch wrong from the get-go when Conor McGregor kicked him off the Ultimate Fighter. But to just understand, that was a huge victory for Prates. Gets to finish in the second round. Since joining the UFC, he's now 3-0 with respectable victories over Trevin Giles, Charles Rackie, and the Leech Jinglang Li, finishing all of them via KO/TKO. Man, he's brutalizing these guys. We already talked about the Rackie knockout. I will say this much though: the Trevin Giles fight, the beginning of that fight, he was not looking to be as dominant as he's looked throughout the entire rest of his UFC stint. Right, he's dominated like every second of every fight besides that first round with Giles, and he was getting touched up in that fight. All right, it was weird. I don't know what was going on there. Hopefully that wasn't a sign of what could happen to him and maybe higher level matchups where he gets touched up and maybe we see him get knocked out. But I know that had me on the edge of my seat because I had some action intertwined with him on that card. I mean, take a look at the numbers here. It's not a coincidence that he's absorbing 5.02 strikes while only landing 4.71. Okay, he has a backwards number there, right? A backwards ratio. A lot of that has to do with the damage that he took in the first round of that Trevin fight. All right. Now, is Neil Magny the type of fighter that's going to put you in major threat if you have that type of performance there, if you're getting touched up on the feet? I'm not really overly concerned with the offensive striking abilities of Neil Magny. Not to say that he doesn't offer anything there. He has an 80-inch wingspan. He's going to come into this fight with about a 7-inch reach advantage, which he has a massive wingspan for this division. But technically, he doesn't really do it for me as far as that one pop strike. He kind of outvolumes you. If you're slipping, and he'll touch you up and he'll change levels on you. He's a very well-rounded fighter. Neil Magny's a very, very well-rounded fighter, and I have a lot of respect for his game, especially for some of the work that he's even done up at the age that he's at. The Mikey Malat fight, that was a huge comeback victory. But remember, he was losing that fight. He was losing the majority of that fight. He took Phil Rowe to the deep water, snuck off a decision there. The Daniel Rodriguez fight, I think that was a fight that he was losing going into that third round, but before pulling that sub. The thing you got to love about him is he's never out. This is a fighter that's always searching to get a finish on you, and this is a 5-round main event fight. So if this fight goes to the later rounds, that's a huge X factor in this fight, right? Carlos Prates is a fighter that not only is he not going to the championship rounds, I mean, he's getting these finishes so early on, right? I mean, these finishes are happening in the first round all the time. Now, if you go over to the kickboxing world, he's had some 5-round fights over there, or he's had a 5-round fight in the kickboxing world. That's different, though. Kickboxing's different, man. That's different than having a Neil Magny hanging on you if he's surviving your early onslaught and he's battling and he's shooting takedowns on you. That's different. Other than that, he has never gone to those championship rounds in the sport of MMA. Again, another 5-round Muay Thai fight. That's different. Muay Thai is different, man. And you could also say lower level competition early on for Prates. Those are some of the X factors going into this fight. He's 31 years old now. Does have a good amount of pro experience, though, 26 professional fights, even though you look at a fighter in Magny, and Magny's a fighter that has 41 professional fights fighting high-level fighters. And we talked about who some of those men that he's been in there with as of recently, which that carries a lot of weight. He's the number 15th ranked welterweight fighter. He's been in the cage. And even though he's been finishing some of those fights, he really showed to be durable and try to push through adversity. Even in those fights, he was taking damage when he was in there with Shavkat Rakhmonov, Gilbert Burns, Michael Morales, Ian Gary. You know, he tried to withstand the damage that those high-level fighters put on him. He did wilt, though, and he did break in some of those. And I think that Prates is going to get him in similar fashion. But the big X factor is if he doesn't get him out early, how is this fight going to look in the later rounds? I really do believe that Magny can take this fight over and drown Prates. I really believe that. If this fight goes to the 4th and 5th round, I have this fight capped very closely. Okay, maybe even I lean towards Magny winning a decision. I don't. We'll see there. Or maybe I have him winning some of those later rounds. Maybe it's still not enough, though, compared to all the damage. And maybe Prates is up 3-0 going into the 4th. But Neal's going to be a problem in the later rounds. I just think that Prates is just too much. And I think that Prates is going to get a knockout in this fight. I think he's going to get a 1st or 2nd round knockout. I just think that he's nasty. Those knees are going to be winging up the middle, elbows, knees, some of the longest straights in the game. And I know it's kind of weird I'm saying some of the longest straights because Neil Magny's a fighter that has an 80-inch wingspan, but the way that Prates extends himself with those straights, it's nasty. The body kicks are nasty. I think he's going to find that finish. I do. And we'll take a look at the betting line right now. Carlos Prates is a minus 650 favorite, give or take. The comeback on Neil Magny right around plus 430. What are you going to do with that? You got to be targeting a KO prop. You got to be targeting unders, early finishes for Prates. I mean, that's the route you probably want to go if you're really looking to make a sharp move. Maybe you're mixing Prates in a parlay if you're just trying to chip up on some quick money, mix them with something else that's safe. You're probably going to cash there, but I just do warn you, if it goes to the later rounds, you may be on the edge of your seat, similar to how you were in the Trevin Giles fight in the 1st round. And just also note, if Prates he has those hands down low, he's vulnerable to being tagged. You never know. This is the fight game. Small gloves. Maybe he gets clipped. Just throwing that out there. But I got Prates getting that first or 2nd round KO finish. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up UFC Vegas 100, the century mark for the UFC Vegas events, huh? Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I've been grinding over here on the mic. You guys know, got to leave you with some parting words. Just throw out to you real quick. If anybody wants to work with me, shoot me a message. Reach out to me. I'll give you some further details. Please like this video. Please subscribe, guys. If you haven't done that already, please do. I put a lot of work in over here. Go follow me on my social media. I'm on IG and Twitter. It's scrolling below. Just scrolled below as I said that. So just rewind this 10, 15 seconds. You'll see my IG and my Twitter. It really does mean a lot to me, though, guys. And I'll leave you guys with this. This was something I was just thinking about. I kind of think about this really every end of the year, especially as Halloween comes in. I'm filming this Halloween right now, so this is something that you guys should probably look to do. This is what I try to do. And sometimes if I don't do it, I'm a little upset with myself. As you get to the end of the year, in my opinion, it's the greatest time of the year. Going into the fall season, almost nearing the winter, all the holidays coming up. Make sure you fully embrace the holiday season or just those special times with your family. And so for example, you have Halloween, it's wrapping up now, but what you should have did is you want to soak it all in, man. If you're a scary movie type of guy, or just putting up some decorations or whatnot, but get involved into the spirit. I like watching scary movies. I'm big into horror movies, so I'm diving into all these horror movies, and that's the time of year I like to watch them. I watch all my horror movies in October. Okay, so I feel like I really absorb and soak in Halloween throughout the month, because once it passes, it's over with. And if you don't do that, you look back and you're like, I wish I would have put a little bit more effort and time into just kind of soaking in being alive and being at this time of my life. And every year is a valuable one. Don't take any year for granted. Don't always just assume that the next one will be there. The next Halloween, just soak them all up and enjoy it while you're young. And that the same thing goes for Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, or whatever other holidays you guys celebrate. Soak them all in. I know I will. I'm going to be now starting to change into that Thanksgiving type of feel, that fall type of feel. Get, the leaves falling and all that. Absorb it in. And maybe what you can do is make sure you're eating good all throughout November, stuffing your face with some healthy but good food, some mashed potatoes, some turkey. Maybe don't just do it just on Thanksgiving. Maybe make yourself an early. And the same thing for Christmas. Get those lights up early, get that tree up early. Enjoy the holiday season, man, because before you know it, we'll just be sitting in old cold January. All right. So every year is another blessed year that you're here. All right, guys. How you like that? Signing out. Teller.
The teller. The teller. The teller.